Hi, welcome to Copenhagen Fashion Week and this talk on New Gen in High Fashion with emerging designer Lily Pham. I'm Ane Lynge-Jorlén and I'm the director of Designers Nest. Good to see you, Lily.
Thank you, you too.
So since graduating from the design school Kolding in 2018, you have worked for two of the finest French fashion houses, Givenchy and Chloé. It's quite an achievement in just 2 years, and I think many of us here today and out there are curious to know about your journey. Until recently, you were a junior designer in the pre-collection team at Givenchy. Prior to this, Designers Nest facilitated an internship for you at Givenchy. How was this transition from interning to finding yourself in a paid position in a French fashion house?
Well, to be honest, to begin with, I was super nervous. Anyone would be, but already when I started interning, I kind of felt this obligation to do well. So to be honest, for me, it didn't change that much. Of course, I had more tasks and different tasks, but in the end, I didn't feel more pressured. I think it's in terms of when you're interning, you should also see yourself as a part of the team. You should really give yourself 100%. And I think that was kind of it wasn't that big of a shock to me, to be honest. But I also had a really lovely team. They were super welcoming. They were really helpful, both the senior designers and the heads, but also everyone was super welcoming, I think. So for me, it wasn't that big of a transition. I do think that people in general are super nice in the industry. They're really they help you to become the best version of yourself in terms of you doing a great job, and of course that's good for the company. So in terms of that, I do think that the fashion industry is quite supportive. Once you get into a house, everyone is really supportive. Everyone wants to see a good result in terms of that.
So what role have you had in the pre-collection team, and sort of which areas have you contributed?
Well, I mainly work with day dresses and doing a lot of tops. Day dresses and
as opposed to
evening.
Yeah.
Well, I did do some evening dresses, but mainly that's more for seniors because, of course, it requires a quite high knowledge of technical knowledge. That being said, I had a boss that was super supportive. She knew that I'd come from Chloé, and Chloé, you work a lot with flue fabrics. So she kind of knew that I would have that knowledge and I would be able to do what she asked me to do. And I kind of knew the whole universe of doing dresses and tops. And so she kind of looked at me and thought, okay, where could Lily contribute and where would she be good? And this is kind of, again, the whole idea of your boss looking at you and making sure that you do the best that you can do and supporting that.
Did you rise to that occasion?
I do hope I did.
So what daily tasks, what do you do? What you can just talk us through the design process that you're involved in?
Well, it could be anything. We could do research, but mainly I did a lot of 3D work. So next to my desk, you could always see a mannequin, and I would always drape. If I had an idea of a sleeve, I would drape it. I didn't do that much sketching before I actually had an actual mock-up. And then afterwards, if the mock-up was validated, I would do the sketch so we could launch it in the factories.
So that's the opposite method of what we do here in Denmark, which is flat pattern construction, right? And whereas you drape 3D from the beginning. How was that? Were you used to that coming from Kolding Design School, or was that a new method for you?
That was half and half. So I interned at Jacquemus as well during school time, and already then I kind of saw how the French industry were working, and they do a lot of 3D work. They're really known for the craftsmanship, and for sure that's still what's the main thing. So I kind of knew, and I continued because I knew, okay, if you want to go back to France one day, you really it's not just knowing the basics, you gotta be really good at it, because there's so many out there that's super talented, and they have the know-how. So in terms of that, I kind of knew that I wanted to continue, and that's what I also brought into my masters when I did my master collection. I knew that I wanted to focus on doing a lot of drapings, and kind of from there start drawing and going back and forth between the 3D work and the two-dimensional work.
So what are the most important things if you've learned so far in your 2 years within 2 different French fashion houses?
It's really to be able to work in a teamwork. You meet so many talented people in general, and the most important thing is that you learn how to be able to work with others and for others. It's really, I was super lucky, so I had the head designer. I would work really close with her, and she's like, she knows everything. And that's what I mean when you meet so many talented people. You can learn from anyone, like the senior designers, other junior designers, the interns, but really also the people that have the craftsmanship. Like I would always sneak into the atelier to see like how would they do the perfect stitch, how would they work with the fabrics, the material, the draping, and I think that was one of like the most valued things I learned was really how they do the things in Paris, like the craftsmanship. And
you told me about sort of material and fabric knowledge, that was also sort of a learning curve for you in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you know, when you kind of like, it's important to, of course, know what's a silk, what's a cotton, but the main thing is really to know how the fabric works around the body. What kind of material do you choose for what kind of shape? And that was, well, I had a head designer. She was so good at really like educating me. She was also expecting me to know it when she would tell me, but in the end I would know, okay, if I'm doing this kind of sleeve, I would know, okay, I will do a material that's more, I would do a taffeta, it's really about the material and how the shape works together. And that you could never achieve, you only work 2-dimensional. You would have to have it in shape, you would have to like just have a toile in calico, but then you would have a feel of how it would look in real life.
I love like the professional lingo going out. So just going back to your graduate collection, which was made entirely up of from upcycled H&M clothes and IKEA fabrics. And it was a very sort of fresh approach to using materials of seemingly low value and integrating in it to a refined collection. Now, most graduates want to change the world, and how did you go from, and I'm presuming here, wanting to change the world to actually working with a sustainable collection, that is, to actually working inside a system for a house that produces 2 pret-à-porter collections, 2 pre-collections annually, and on top, haute couture on top of that. How do you deal with that?
Well, the whole industry, of course, is a little bit complicated, and I know that I alone cannot change that. Of course, I know that in our office we were really like aware of how much, like when we would try to recycle as many fabrics as possible. But I know for the big luxury houses in general, you have a pre-buy, so you don't go out and produce a crazy amount of garments. You kind of look at, okay, what do the buyers order, and then you kind of produce from that, because in general, of course, if you produce in Italy, the prices are much higher, so you won't go out and produce crazy amounts of garments for no reason. But of course, it is complicated. I do think that the designers in the industry try to do their best to like, I'll save on the calico, I won't use as much, and kind of like reuse old styles, reuse old vintage to do new styling sessions. And
calico is the fabric you use for toiles, right?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. So I do think we are aware that the situation with like to be able to be sustainable, but it is complicated because there's so many different powers in the fashion industry. It's not just only creating beautiful garments. It's not just being creative. There's so many other
power structures, hierarchy.
Completely.
Yeah.
That I, as a designer, like I can try to do my best, but it is complicated. Yeah. So
it's perhaps a design thinking than in a way that you can actually influence the whole system, at least at the point where you are at right now. So coming back to interning, as you said, you interned at Jacques Mus, which you did while you were at Design School Kolding, and then after your graduation, you were at Givenchy before landing your paid position. Now, there's a lot of talk about sort of the inequality of internships, that only people of a certain economic and social position can afford to do them. Internships, to my knowledge at least, vary in payment between 500 euros and 1,300 euros a month, which doesn't really sustain a living in Paris. Are you sort of aware of this privilege?
Of course I am, of course. But in general, I think it already starts in the design school. You know, I remember at my school anyway, there was such a, like, you should always use the best materials, you should always use the silk, the more natural materials, and of course that has a price, so it will always become like a matter of how much things would cost, and you do produce collections during your school years. So in terms of that, I do think it's not just the fashion industry, it's also the schools. A lot of schools are super expensive to enter. You pay a tuition fee.
Yeah, Central St. Martin's, for instance. Yeah.
And so many other schools. So I was, of course, I am aware of my situation, and I'm super lucky. The big houses in France do pay 1,300. I lived in a small studio. You can get that for 500 euros. So you do fine. You know, it's an investment for 6 months, of course, and then hopefully it will pay out in the end.
By getting a paid position.
A paid position, exactly.
You're building your CV.
Exactly.
So working in high fashion really involves a lot of flexibility and a lot of sort of a mindset that at least to people outside of fashion and outside of the creative industry seem mind-boggling and even unhealthy, to say the least.
Yeah.
So, and the working hours are definitely not 9 to 5.
No.
We just had a conversation about that prior to starting this conversation. So what does it take to work in high fashion in a junior position, and what are sort of the sacrifices to do this kind of work?
Well, for instance, you need to, the thing is, I'm Danish, so I'm really an early bird. I get up early, and I love to come in early to work, to do some work. It's so quiet in the office, and you have some peace in mind to start your work. That being said, of course, you really need to be positive. I know it sounds so like to be happy all the time, but I'm really fortunate that I was able to go to Paris and work, and I know I'm aware of that privilege, and at the same time, if you're happy, it's kind of contagious. Like if everyone in the office is super like depressed and sad about everything, so for me it was really being happy and remember to have fun, because it kind of becomes your second family. You're there a lot, like the working hours are a lot, and you stay in the office a lot. But I had such a good time with my colleagues, like, and I think that's important, really, to stay positive, because it is contagious. So that's
karma.
Yeah, exactly. No, but really, so
yeah. So there's something to be said about sort of the mental and emotional side of this too, I guess. Sort of, and how do you sort of deal with the demands that you have to be on point? You have to create within a tight deadline with immaculate execution. It sounds as if it's a working environment that requires a certain robustness.
Well, it does.
Mental robustness.
Of course, I had my days where I thought, okay, this is super hard, but in the end of the day, everyone is super helpful, and I didn't really think, of course I was aware that I had a deadline, but in the end I tried to remember I wanted to do a good job. And once you gain experience, once you go different places, you kind of know how to work with the material. You also know like how to tell your boss, like, okay, of course I will do it, but I need some time. And in general, people, if they know you do your best and you work in general fast, it's okay. So it's really in terms of being able also to say, like, you should never just be like, I'll be done soon if you won't be done soon. Like, you should be honest about, okay, this will take me this long, and then people will respect it for you because they know you work well. They know that you're not just going to sit and drink coffee or something. So
one last question here. What advice would you give to aspiring graduates who would want to do what you've done, work in Parisian high fashion?
You need to learn to drape. You need to love how to drape. You need to really work in the three. Depends on how far you are with your school, but really focus on becoming good at the basis. You need to know how the material works. You need to, like, don't give up the block patterns. You should really focus on working on a mannequin, working with draping. And then in terms of, like, once you finish school, right away, because now it's the time. Like, don't sit around, don't move to Copenhagen first. If you want to go to Paris, just stay at your parents. That's what I did. And then once the opportunity was given to me, I moved to Paris. So really just, be prepared. It's a lot of work, but once you're there, it's really worth it.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing your insights
You're
and
welcome.
experiences with me today, and thank you so much for tuning into this live talk from Copenhagen Fashion Week.